I'm sorry, Father. Consider this an act of divine retribution.
That make us even.
Mafia Definitive Edition sees us return to an enhanced version of Lost Heaven, Illinois, and experience Tommy Angelo's journey from cab driver to top gangster in the Salieri crime family. This game remakes the original Mafia from the ground up, including an expanded story and new assets, but did Hangar 13, the devs behind the game, updated enough to make this remake worth buying? Let's discuss. Taking place in the 1930s, in the heart of the Great Depression, we meet Tommy Angelo, the main character who's a cab driver struggling to make ends meet. One day, as he's outside his cab, he's forced to drive 2 men away from what appears to be an ambush, as they hold him at gunpoint and make him drive to the desired destination. Unknown to Tommy, these weren't just any 2 men, these were members of the Salieri crime family, Paulie Lombardo and Sam Trapani. Once they're dropped off back at the bar, he declines the Don's invitation to work for the organization until a little bit later when some rival gangs smash up his car, prompting him to seek out revenge. This was only the start of his journey, as there is many twists and turns that happen after. Because the game is linear, you experience the plot through chapters which are nothing more than mission names. What makes this story intriguing is that it starts out slow and then gradually ramps up. Many of the early missions don't involve anything complex, they just laid the foundation for some of the tougher sections that were to come. The game did a great job at inserting the tutorials as you play along in the story, instead of having an entire dedicated section to just learning the controls. This kept everything moving at a solid pace, eliminating the stagnant opening that's present in so many story-driven games. As you go through Tommy's journey, you understand why he makes the decisions that he does, and you can relate to his feelings. There are certain situations where you can see that he's conflicted in his decision making because he's forced to do things he doesn't want to do because he believes they're morally wrong, but he's torn because he enjoys everything that comes with being in the Mafia. The outside world influences a lot of the events that occur, and you can see the relationship between Tommy and everyone in the organization change over time until it reaches its tipping point. There are many hard truths that the player has to accept while playing the story, and the devs did a good job at making it feel like your choices had consequences. There is a sense of realism that met my expectations for a remake of this level. Everything from the atmosphere, cars, clothes, and music all made me feel like I stepped in a time machine back to the 1930s. The bars and restaurants all look vintage and contain older furniture that you wouldn't see today, obviously because this takes place almost 100 years ago from current times. Tommy is a character that seems bland on the surface, but once you understand that he's just a family man that wanted to earn a living but got entangled in the wrong situation, you start to sympathize with him. But once you consider everything he's done, you understand why the plot goes in the direction that it does. The devs did a great job at making you feel like Tommy is a good guy, but reminding you that he's still a mobster, and at the end of the day, he's breaking the law. Overall, this story is one that relies heavily on its main cast, and if you don't pay attention to the people around Tommy and their motivations, you can miss out on important story beats. If you enjoy a classic Mafia story with emotion and a little bit of grit, then you'll definitely want to experience this. The gameplay for this remake is greatly improved over the original and is noticeable right from the opening cutscene. The graphics for this game are good and are about what you would expect for a remake of a 20-year-old game. The most jarring change in graphics had to be the character models themselves. In every cutscene, the facial structures and animations look clean and crisp, giving each person their own identity. Just take a look at Tommy. The difference between the OG and the remake is like night and day. Having this fresh coat of paint on the characters helped to make them more memorable than they would have been if they still resembled the old graphics. As you can expect, you play as Tommy and only him from mission to mission. The main issue with his gameplay is that Tommy's movement is really stiff and slow. Every time you decide to run, walk, or move, it just feels like you're moving through mud. When you're in a heated combat encounter, you may find yourself wanting to do one thing and then pressing the button to do so, but because Tommy moves slow, he performs the action late and you end up dying. Focusing more on the combat, it's about what you would expect for a Mafia game. There's tons of shooting, killing, and robbing both other mobsters and police. You have various weapons you can use like the shotgun, rifle, pistols, machine guns, and melee weapons like baseball bats and knives. Each of these prove useful depending on the situation, but as you play, you'll discover which weapon you gravitate towards the most. For me, it was the shotgun, as many times there are areas where you need to get in close, and having a shotgun on you will help you blow right by the enemies. Of course, shotguns don't help when you're trying to shoot enemies from far distances, but because you can run and then hide behind cover, there's almost never a time where you can't close the distance on anybody in the area. You might be wondering how you can hold all of these weapons. And similar to other games, this game has a weapon wheel that you can use to rotate and find the item you're looking for. Personally, I didn't use this too much, as I preferred pressing L1 quickly to switch between my pistol and shotgun, but it depends on the player as to how they select their weapon. Unlike other action games, you can't just run and gun your way through every combat encounter, because if you do that, you'll die fast. Each time you take a bullet, your health goes down for a little bit until you find cover and allow it to regenerate some. This regeneration isn't very fast, and it doesn't increase your health back up to where it originally was, but it does allow you to slow down and breathe while you figure out your next plan of attack. In other words, if you don't take cover, you're going to die a lot. There's someone in the Salieri crew that houses all the guns and items you need for combat, so when you need to stock up, you just go see this person. When inside that room, you have all the guns previously mentioned available, allowing you to craft a loadout that best suits your playstyle. It's good to constantly look at what weapons you have available, as sometimes I went into the missions with little to no ammo because I forgot to re-up before starting the next section. Just some advice. The most confusing thing about the gameplay is why the story missions and free roam are separate. When inside the main menu, you have the ability to choose story or free ride, with the latter giving you the ability to roam the city freely as you please. The only problem is that there's nothing to do in the city. When looking at the map, there's no icons that tell you that something is available to do, just a map with some small symbols representing the places that you've been to. It's like the devs decided to give you the option to run around and shoot people outside the story if you wanted to. Why couldn't you free roam in between the missions baffles me, as it hinders the replayability of the game, as once you finish the story for the first time, there's no incentive to go back. If they used the tried and true formula of icons representing people on the map, then all of this could have flowed so much better. The enemies themselves could have used a little bit better AI, as there's times where they don't respond to your movements or will completely walk past you in the middle of combat encounters. It's not terrible by any means, but they could act a bit more realistic to be in line with how real everything else in the game is. There was times I was playing and found myself wondering how they didn't hear me run or jump when I was directly behind them. Not a huge issue, but one that could have added to the overall immersion. The environment looks great as well, as when you're driving through the city streets, the buildings and roads all have updated textures and seem to pop even from far distances. In order to create a faithful remake for a Mafia game, you had to nail the buildings and open areas, and Hangar 13 did exactly that. No matter where you went, every place felt unique from the rest, making them seem like actual places and not just another building with a different name. There's plenty of NPCs littered all throughout the city, with each person wearing clothes that you would expect to see for that era. These people would make comments and say things at you depending on which part of the story you were in. It would have been nice to have an option to press a button to say something back, but that's just me. These other people all add something to each area and each mission, as the actions they perform align with whatever is going on at the time. For example, there's a mission where you find yourself on a yacht for a party, and the passengers on the boat aren't just standing around, but they're dancing, talking, and drinking, like you would find at an actual party. The way the other people act helped separate Tommy from everyone else, making it feel like you were different than the average commoner within the city. The HUD for the game was updated to look more like GTA, as the speedometer and mini-map while driving was changed to align with today's gameplay standards. A much needed addition was the inclusion of waypoints, as whenever you drove to the next area, the game would guide you where you needed to go and how to get there. This seems like a common practice nowadays, but games 20 years ago did not include fast travel and road guides, making the trek from place to place longer than it needed to be. Since we're on the topic of driving, it's worth mentioning that the driving in this game is terrible. It doesn't matter which car you choose to take, it's still pretty bad. The speed of the car depends on the type of car you choose to drive, just like any other game, but it's the handling which is the core issue. Anytime you try to turn a corner or go down a city street, the car veers over where you turned at, so if you're driving and you turn your car left, it will drift far to the right, making you crash into the objects or people nearby. Because the driving is so bad, you're forced to drive slower, which limits the gameplay. Due to the addition of a skip drive function, which you can enable in the menu, you have the ability to skip almost every driving section, reducing some frustration. But what you can't skip are the sections where you need to escape the police after committing a crime. These moments aren't bad at first, but as you progress further and face an onslaught of cops, the driving issue is pushed front and center. These sections were so annoying it got to the point where I didn't want to commit a crime because I didn't want to deal with the police, where in a game called Mafia, that's not possible. Inside each mission, there are collectibles that you can find like magazines and cigarette cards. They are pretty easy to find as they're indicated by a colored dot on the minimap that's separate from the red enemy dots. I like these collectibles a lot as the art on them was really nice to look at, so nice that every time I saw one of these on the map, I almost always tried to collect it. I wish more games did book covers and cards because it's a nice change up to the normal concept art we get in most games. Simply put, Mafia Definitive Edition is a solid remake of the original that did a good job at capturing the essence of 1930s Illinois. It's not flawless and has some issues that hold it back from being considered a top tier remake like Resident Evil 4 or Final Fantasy VII, but it's still worth playing. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8. I think this game is definitely worth a playthrough if you're into third-person shooting games in the mob. If you have PlayStation Plus Extra, the game is free on there, or if you have another way of playing the game at a reasonable price, then I would recommend picking this up. What did you think of Mafia Definitive Edition? Did you enjoy this more than the original? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, Christ, Tom. Snap out of it. You remember what those guys wanted to do to Sarah?
Yeah. Just,
Hey, let's get out of here before the bulls show up, huh?